And so he said, come on, says, I'll meet you here when you get here. Well, I did some calculation and I figured it was going to take me till about 1 o'clock in the morning to get there. So I went on down the road. I get to Connecticut, I had to cross through part of New York State, and I forget the other state, but I crossed several states going up there. And so I got to Danbury, and I figured the easiest way to find the place was just, I had an address, so just stop and ask where this place was. So that's what I did. I pulled in a station, and this was between 12 and 1 o'clock, probably after 12:30 in the morning. And I stopped at this station and walked in. There was no business whatsoever. And this man was leaning up on a cash register looking out the window. And I went in and said something like I needed some directions to a place I was going. He never grunted. He never turned around and looked at me. He didn't do nothing. Didn't say a word. Didn't make any noise. Just kept watching out the window. Well, I finally got the hint and left. And I thought later, well, maybe he was asleep with his eyes open. I didn't know. But I did get a little upset about it. I went on down the road and stopped at another station. And that person was real rude and didn't want to help at all. So I don't know. So I went to another station. And this was a lady. And she wasn't real friendly, but she did help. And she said, oh, said, I know where that's at. Said, and I had a map, and she gave me directions how to get there. So I went on, and I got there just about 1 o'clock. And we unloaded it, and I set it up for him, showed him how to operate it, got it running, showed him it run, and we sewed on some scrap leather he had there. And so he was satisfied, and I had told him to start with that I would have to have cash. I didn't want to take a check. And he said, okay, that will be a little bit of a problem, but I'll handle it. And so he gave me the cash, paid me for it, gave him a receipt, and got ready to leave. And just from his attitude, the attitude of everybody that I met up there, I don't want to run down everybody in Connecticut, but I got to thinking, you know, he knows that I'm going back, and I mentioned that I was just going to go out of town somewhere and stop at a roadside park and sleep until morning. And I just got to thinking about, you know, what if he and somebody decide, well, they're just going to follow me out of town, and when I stop at the roadside park, they're going to get their money back. Well, that was a far-fetched thing, but then it was on my mind. So I drove till I just couldn't drive no more. And it was almost morning, and I finally pulled over and slept 3-4 hours. And got up and come on back. But handling cash like that, and it's got its advantages, but then it's got its disadvantages. I had took a trip down in East Texas. I hadn't found anything to buy up in Ohio and Pennsylvania, up in that area, and I was without anything to sell. And I had talked to 1 or 2 people down around San Antonio and in that area, and one guy had indicated that he knew a shop that could be bought for the right price, and So I decided, well, I'll just go down there and see what I can find. Well, I was driving an old van at that time, and I didn't take a trailer with me. And this thing somebody had started customizing the inside, and it had a shelf and above the visor, and it had another something built on the engine cowling, but it was just for what I wanted for it to haul equipment in. And so I went down there and fiddled around San Antonio all one day, and drove on down to Houston, and I knew one or two people down there, and I wasn't able to pick up anything to mount to anything, and so I come back to San Antonio and headed west out of San Antonio. And somebody said that there was some small towns out there, then there was some shops, and I might could pick up something out there, out that road. Whoo, me, that was the most desolate road I believe I'd ever saw. You could drive for miles and miles and not see a house of any kind. Every once in a while, maybe every 50 or something miles, you might see a ranch house sitting back way off the road, up on a hill or somewhere way off the road. But man, and the traffic wasn't just real heavy. There just wasn't much out there. Well, I had about $3,000 in cash on me. I come prepared to buy some equipment, and I passed this road. It was I'm sorry, not a road. I passed this car sitting on the side of the road, and it was a black big Buick or something like that. And you never saw, this was before the tinted windows got popular, but this thing, the windows was so tinted that you couldn't see inside at all. And well, when I passed it, it pulled in behind me and started following me. And I didn't think much about it for a while, and after a little bit, well, it got within about 100 feet behind me and just stayed there. Well, I slowed down and it slowed down. I speed up and it speed up. Well, I started getting a little nervous. I started trying to stuff that money in some of that contraptions that had been built in the inside of that van, and trying to get that money hid. And a little bit, I just slowed down real slow. I said, either they're going to pull me over or they're going to go around me. Well, I slowed down to about 10 or 15 miles an hour, and they stayed back there for a little bit, and 3 or 4 minutes, and then they started around me. Well, I fully expected them to pull in front of me and stop, but they didn't. They just went on like nothing had ever happened. But it was a little nervous at that time for me. That was the first trip that I took when I was carrying cash that I didn't carry a gun. I didn't carry a gun on that trip. Every trip I made, I carried a gun. And well, honestly, back then I carried a gun nearly all the time. Not on myself, if usually in the vehicle. That was nothing unusual in Texas. Everybody run around, especially if you had pickups, you run around with a shotgun or a rifle hanging on a gun rack across the back window of the pickup. So that wasn't unusual. When I moved to Ohio, though, I was, like I told before on this tape, I lived in the back of the store building for a couple of months, and during the week, and I kept a gun with me there, and I said something about it. We had 2 or 3 SWAT members Columbus Police SWAT members for customers, and one of them got to be real good friends with the store. They come in a lot. They talk to everybody, and so one day I asked him. I said, "What if a guy carried a gun here?" He knew I was from Texas. He said, "Well, I sure wouldn't advise it." I said, "Well, why?" I said, and the store was sitting right on the border of the two most high crime rate areas in the city. And I said, "Why?" I said, "With everything going on right here," I said, "looks to me like that it'd be a little safer carrying a gun." "Yeah, but the police don't think that." Said, "If you get caught," says, "you'll be charged with carrying a firearm, unlawful carrying of a firearm." And so I started not carrying it as much. I did keep it there with me in the store, and on the weekends, on Friday evening, I'd go back to Indiana, where the family was, and spend the weekend and come back Monday morning. And I carried it with me on the road, but I didn't carry it too much in town after that. After Gary and I quit the repair business, I fiddled with the machinery, and then that kind of slowed down. I guess I got every bootmaker in Texas hooked up with machinery, but all of a sudden the market wasn't there anymore. And I had a brother-in-law that was in painting business. He was a painter, and he had a couple of jobs that he needed some help on, so I decided I'd help him. Well, to end up, we kind of went in partners, and we got a couple of real good jobs there in Mineral Wells, and then a lady that we did some work for there in Mineral Wells, she decided that she wanted us to do some work for her in Ponca City, Oklahoma. And they had a complete apartment complex up there that needed, the whole thing needed repainting. So we did that. We did a couple of more jobs for her, and then it kind of moved from there into construction. I started working with my dad. He was doing wrought iron work. He run into a guy that, a son of a couple that he knew, that was building an office building in Fort Worth, and he needed some staircases and a fire escape built. Well, I went in with Dad, and he wanted us to be partners on it, and so we went and we built the staircase, which was a pretty complicated staircase. It wasn't something that they could just go buy ready built and set in. It was built around a big column, and it had two landings on it, just going to the floor above it. Then the staircase, the fire escape was outside. It was a ladder, not a ladder, but it was just stairs made out of metal where it wouldn't burn, and enclosed in a brick wall. And before we finished with that, well, the contractor come to me. He knew I'd been doing some painting. He said, "We can't get this guy to come back and redo this wall. The painting, he didn't paint it real good." He said, "How about painting it for us?" I said, "Okay." So I brought my stuff, and the next day we painted it. And he said, well, we're fixing to build a nursing home up in Denton, Texas. Would you want to do the painting on it? Well, Dad and I didn't have anything going after that. I said, okay, I'll do it. Well, I went up there, ended up doing some sheetrock on it. We did all of the sheetrock finishing, finishing out the joints, putting a texture on the walls and on the ceiling, and then painting it. And we got through with that, and he said, well, let's go so and so, and it says, we got I believe it was a I don't remember how many beds it was, but it was a big nursing home, bigger than, that's all he did was build nursing homes. And after that, I think the building in Fort Worth was just a fill-in somewhere where he didn't have anything else to do. And he said, this is the biggest I've ever built. Well, we went up there, and all we did on that was finish out the drywall and paint it. And then he went to Spur, Texas, and Spur, Texas had 1,500 people, and what he was doing was adding on to an existing nursing home, and it was only 3,000 foot. And he called me and said, how about coming and bidding on this? I said, okay. So I went over to his house and get the plans so I could bid on it. And so I said, okay, the floor, and he started laying out all these plans, and I said, well, all I need is the floor plan, give me the square footage and all of that. He said, oh no, said, I want you to build it. I thought, Lord have mercy. I said, Robert, I've never built a nursing home. He said, yeah, but you built my barn, so I know you can do it. Dad and I had built a metal barn for him. And I guess he was real impressed with this barn. And this was going to be a metal frame nursing home. Going to be all metal. Metal studs, metal everything. And so he figured that couldn't be much different than a barn. So I said, okay. So I took everything home. Took me about a week to do the figuring on it and the estimating. And I took it back to him, and I figured that I was a little high on it, but I wanted to cover myself. And he said, okay. Said, I'll let you know when we're going to start it. And the weather in that part of the state was pretty predictable. So when I went up there, it was late in the summer. I don't recall the date that they told me now, but they told me when I went up there, the residents, people around there, they said, now you've got to have this thing dried in by a certain date. I said, why is that? He said, well, it'll start raining this date. And I said, okay, we'll see what we can do. Well, I went up there by myself. I didn't have a crew to take with me, and I went up there and hired 4 guys locally to help me. And we did pretty good, but one of them decided he was going to do something else, and he left. And you know, with 1,500 people in town, you don't have a whole lot to draw from. So it finally dribbled down to where I only had one guy helping me. And boy, we were really rushing it to try to get this thing dried in before that date. It had a metal roof on it. We were able to buy the sheets long enough to go from the eave down to the end of the roof. Just one sheet, the full length, and then another sheet went off the other side. So that went pretty fast. Well, the day arrived that they were talking about it, and we didn't have it dried in. We liked about 10 sheets of roof. Then we had to put the ridge cap on to get it completely dried in. And about 2 o'clock that evening, we were putting the last piece of ridge top in, installing it when the rain started. So we got a little bit wet finishing off. But anyway, I'm getting off of leather, aren't I? We had, Evelyn and I had been talking, and we decided that our grandkids in Columbus, Ohio, was growing up without us, and without us being able to be around them. So we got to talking about moving back to Columbus. And Robert didn't have a nursing home contractor. He didn't have anything else coming up. So we didn't have anything looking at, any work that we were looking at. So we decided that we would make a trip to Columbus and look around and see what the work situation was. And it was we finished up the nursing home, but it was going to be 2 weeks before the state inspector could get there. So Evelyn and I decided, okay, we're going to take a week and go to Columbus and check things out while we're waiting on the inspector. Well, Evelyn and I had been doing crafts in our part-time, just in odd times, and in the winter when work wasn't real good, well, and we had some spare time, we were doing crafts, going to some craft shows, and we had saw a store open up in Azle, Texas, that they opened this building up and broke it up into stalls, and usually 8 by 10 or something like that, and rented those stalls out for crafters to bring in their crafts. They displayed it and then left it, and the crew at the store took care of it. People come in, shop, they took the money for the product. They kept track of who sold what, so they, at the end of 2 weeks or a month, I forget which it was, they paid every crafter what they'd sold. And we really liked that concept. And in fact, we looked around and at the possibility of starting another one over around Mineral Wells. That would have been far enough away from that other one that it wouldn't matter. Well, we never get anything going. So we come on to Columbus during that week. We come up, spent a week, we looked around, and I looked at some buildings and checked them out. And then, make a long story short, when we left here, we had made a commitment on a building. And so we went back home and packed, and the state inspector come around and finished out that we passed the test, and so that finished off that job. So we packed up, headed to Columbus, and we opened what we call the T&E Craft Mall. And it was moderately successful, and we stayed with it for close to 5 years. And it just got it just got to be too much for us. We were having to be there all the time, one of us, and it just got to be too much. So we decided to close it. We closed it, and in the meantime, I had got the itch